While Michael A. Stackpole was writing the X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic, his editor at Dark Horse Comics, Pete Janes, asked him to create an Imperial Red Baron character to supplement the series' existing New Republic aces. Stackpole came up with Jagged Fel, not a hereditary nobleman like the real-life Manfred von Richthofen, but a Corellian farm boy who attends the Imperial Academy on Carida at the same time as Han Solo, and works his way up to becoming the commander of the 181st Imperial Fighter Wing and a Baron of the Empire. Fel was introduced in X-Wing Rogue Squadron issue number 21, part 1 of the In the Empire's Service arc. Issue number 22 mentioned his wife, and issue number 25 related his life story through flashbacks, including the pivotal information that his wife is Syal Antilles, the older sister of Wedge, and that she acted under the stage name of Wynessa Starflare. Fel and Syal were married around 1 year after the Battle of Yavin, and the X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic takes place after the Battle of Endor, around 4 years after the Battle of Yavin. During the events of the comic, Fel defects to the New Republic and joins Rogue Squadron. His wife remains in hiding, and once the comic concluded, Fel vanished. Side note here, Wikipedia says that Syal was reunited with Fel while he served in the New Republic, but that never appeared in the comics at all, and instead can only be gleaned from reference material like the New Essential Guide to Characters and the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia. Michael A. Stackpole and Timothy Zahn had intended to tell the story of Fel's recruitment into Grand Admiral Thrawn's Empire the Hand in a 6-part comic arc called The Re-Enlistment of Baron Fel. But unfortunately, the Rogue Squadron comic was canceled after issue number 35. They reworked their idea into a 4-part short story, but ultimately that story never saw the light of day. Instead, Fel and Syal disappear from the New Republic, and Wedge Antilles worries in the later X-Wing books about their fates. Fel seems to reappear in Wraith Squadron and the next 2 X-Wing books working for Warlord Zinj, but that turns out to be actually the actor Tetrin Cowell in disguise. We don't see Fel again until Vision of the Future, the 2nd book in the Hand of Thrawn duology by Timothy Zahn. And it relates what I presume we would have learned in the re-enlistment of Baron Fel. Fel was captured by Isard, she turned him over to Thrawn, and after showing him the terrible things that were lurking in the unknown regions, Fel accepted a position in the Empire the Hand. Syal presumably joined Fel on Narawan, and we don't hear from the Fels again until the new Jedi Order series. And this is where things start to get a little funky, because with multiple authors working on 19 books, let's just say that the Fel family tree gets a little convoluted in the end. But don't take it from me, let's look at the direct quotes from the books. In 2000, we had the 3rd book in the new Jedi Order series, Darktide Ruin by Michael A. Stackpole. The Imperials, led by Admiral Palayan, show up to help the New Republic in facing off against this new invasion threat. And accompanying Palayan is Baron Fel's son, Jagged Fel, leading a squadron of Chiss fighters. Palayan said he didn't even know they existed until he put the call out, and Jag and these Chiss show up. And Jag ends up having several conversations with Han and Leia's daughter, Jaina Solo. On page 190, Jag says, "And as for fighting for my freedom, I've been doing that in the unknown regions for all my life. My mother gave birth to 5 children. My older brother died fighting, as did a younger sister. And then on page 217, in a conversation with Jaina, we have, Jaina turned and looked at him.
In theory, you're only 2 years older than me, but you're talking like you're old enough to be my dad.
So, what does this tell us? Some simple facts. That Baron Fel and Syal had 5 children. 2 of them are deceased. A brother older than Jag and a younger sister. And that Jag is 2 years older than Jaina. At this point in time, Jaina is 16 years old, so this would place Jag about 18 years old. And since she was born 9 years after the Battle of Yavin, we can guesstimate that Jag was born 7 years ABY. Jag was there for the Battle of Ithor, but then the Imperial forces withdraw, and while Jag stays a little longer, ultimately his father does pull him back to Chiss space, and we don't see Jag again until 2001. We had like a prequel short story by Elaine Cunningham that appeared in Star Wars Gamer magazine, Red Sky, Blue Flame. And here's where things start to get a little murky. On page 21, Jag thinks that his brother Davin had been a hero in every sense of the word, and the Chiss found 1,000 ways to remind him of it. And then on the next page, page 22, some very important information which will be a key contributor to this timeline craziness. No human but Baron Fel knew of its location, and this information had been given him grudgingly and with a cost. The safety of his only living son. So obviously what we can glean from Red Sky Blue Flame is that at this point in time in the timeline, Davin is already dead and Jag is the Fel's only surviving son. However, where to place Red Sky Blue Flame in the book's internal chronology is a little bit confusing. The way it's written, it seems to be set immediately after Vision of the Future, which was set 19 ABY. But Jag is described as 14 years old, which would make him born 5 years ABY instead of 7, and in turn would then make him not 18 in Darktide Ruin. Jumping ahead to 2002, we have another Elaine Cunningham story, this one the new Jedi Order novel, Dark Journey. As Jaina and the other young Jedi Knights escape from Murker and Jaina must deal with her feelings of regret and rage and vengeance, Baron Fel summons his son to speak with him, basically that he's going to send him to New Republic space to figure out what's going on after the fall of Coruscant. And in the process, we learn a little bit more about the Fel family here. On page 57 to 58, we have Fel's thoughts. The burden of sending his promising 20-year-old son into a seemingly impossible fight weighed heavily upon him. Davin had been about Jag's age when he'd been sent to his final battle, and his sister Cherith even younger. Soontir Fel rose and began to pace the room. He had never turned away from duty, and he would not now. But nothing he'd faced in his long career had been as difficult as this. Sending his 3rd child to serve, and most likely to die. So, some key information here. We finally have names for those 2 Fel kids that died before Darktide Ruin occurred. The older brother is Davin, and he's described as being about Jag's age when he died, so 20? Around in there. And the younger sister is Cherith, and she was younger than that. In 2003, we had the Force Heretic trilogy and the new Jedi Order series, the only trilogy in the whole series, written by Sean Williams and Shane Dix. In book number 2, Refugee, Luke and Mara and Jason and company head to the Chiss homeworld of Scylla to try to get some information to figure out where Zonama Seacoat is in the unknown regions. And while they're there, they encounter Baron Fel, his wife Syal, and their younger daughter, Winessa, or Win. On page 185, we get this description. Behind her stood a blonde human girl who looked to be in her early teens. She was dressed in a black uniform that looked like a miniature version of the CEDF dress code. And this is my daughter, Wynn. And then later in the book, we get this dialogue from Wynn to Jason. I'll see if I can get Father to let me take Starflare, our family yacht. I'm licensed to fly her, you know. Not that I get much of a chance because Chem's always taking her out. So finally, we have the younger Fel kid named, it's Wynn, and maybe another Fel kid named as well if Chem is meant to be a Fel child. Chem's not identified as such, but I mean, who else would be taking out the Fel family yacht? And importantly, Chem's gender is not specified. We don't get a he, we don't get a she, we just get a name. So if you're doing some internal math, you can see that we have 4, possibly 5 named Fel kids at this point. We have Davin, we have Jag, we have Cherith, we have Vanessa, and we have Chem, whoever they may be. But then in rolls Timothy Zahn in 2004's Survivor's Quest to just put a spanner in the entire thing. While Mara Jade is on a business trip for her employer, Talon Card, and her husband, Luke Skywalker, is accompanying her, they receive a message from Narawan that says that the remains of outbound flight has been found, and the Chiss want to request Jedi representatives as they go to its final resting place. Mara and Luke board the Chiss diplomatic vessel. There's a suspicious situation with a cut wire, but they're both safe. And they encounter a young man and a squad of stormtroopers who have been sent from the Empire of the Hand. And that young man, well, he's a Fel kid. On page 58, we have Mara's point of view. Up close, he looked even younger than he had from the ceiling, no older than his mid-20s. Like a kid playing soldier, the irreverent thought struck her. I'm Commander Jagged Fel, Warrior of the Hand. You may remember meeting my father a couple of years ago. Very well, Mara said, smiling tightly at the memory. I'm sure General Baron Fel remembers me as well. So with the introduction of Jagged Fel, we have a problem. If you count Chem as a Fel child, we now have 6 Fel kids. Additionally, Chak introduces some other problems, but let's pull up a Fel family timeline to really show you the issues here. Syal Antilles was born 31 years before the Battle of Yavin, and Soontir Fel was born 28 years BBY. As I said in the intro, they married around 1 year ABY, and the X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic takes place 4 ABY. If Jag was born 7 ABY, that would make it during the time when the Fels had moved to Narawan in the unknown regions. And in fact, a short story by Timothy Zahn, Crisis of Faith, which is set 8 ABY, confirms that at this point in time, Fel is working for Thrawn. We don't have any Fel family updates until 19 ABY when Mara runs into Baron Fel on Narawan. And then if we place Red Sky Blue Flame the same year, which I believe was Cunningham's intentions, even if the dates are a little funky, Davin is already dead, and Jag is now Baron Fel's only living son. Survivor's Quest is set 22 ABY, and Chak is in his mid-20s. But if we look back up at the top there, and if Fel and Syal married around 1 ABY, that places his birth right after they got married, if not before they got married, and they really only knew each other a year before they got married. So as much as I like Chak as a character, he's a little bit too old. Jumping down to 25 ABY, we have the events of Dark Tide Ruin, when we learned there were 5 Fel kids and 2 are dead. And again, Dark Journey in 27 ABY related that Davin died when he was Jag's age, so he had to have died before 19 ABY or around 19 ABY, and he was around 20 when he died. Again, now that we've seen it, look at that wedding date. Davin is also just a little bit too old. Force Heretic Refugee is set 28 ABY. Wynn is described as being in her early teens. No information about Chem beyond their name. And you'll see a final thing on the timeline from Darkness, the Joiner King, but we'll talk about that soon. So as you probably guessed, 6 potential Fel kids, and not just 6 potential Fel kids, but 2 Fel kids that are too old for where they appear in the timeline, meant that people had a lot of different theories. And not so strangely enough, a lot of them revolved around clones. This is not surprising because in Vision of the Future, we met a family of clones of Baron Fel. So we know that he agreed to be cloned, that there are clones of him running around in the galaxy. So some of the main arguments that existed on the Star Wars message boards, the Force.net message boards, was that Jag was a clone, Chak was a clone, or some combination thereof. I think that you could argue that Jag is really definitely not a clone because he has green eyes, and his father had brown. I'm pretty sure that unless you're getting into some sort of clothes but you add special genes situation, that wouldn't happen. Chak as a clone makes a little bit more sense than Jag as a clone, but again, he's just too darn old. When would he have been cloned? This would have had to have been without Baron Fel's consent. And so the idea that I feel had the biggest support was that Chak and Davin were the same person. That Chak was a nickname for Davin, but that idea only works if you don't set Red Sky Blue Flame immediately after Vision of the Future, because Chak appears a whole 3 years later in another novel. Sue Rostoni, who worked for Lucas Books, in fact, originally suggested that Chak was just Davin's nickname, and that seemed to be the route that they were going to officially take, even though Chak seems to be a commanding officer, and Davin seems to have been a pilot, but maybe he was a well-rounded individual and he did both. And nothing further was known or said about Chem, and I believe a lot of people assumed that Chem was a girl to fit with that Baron Fel's only living son mention. But along came 2005 and Troy Denning's Darkness trilogy, and with it, finally, a solution to this how many kids does Baron Fel have conundrum. And it's an interesting choice. In the first book of the trilogy, The Joiner King, Luke and Mara are speaking with aristocrat Formby, and they start to talk about the Fel family. On pages 284 to 285, we have this conversation. "I see," Luke said, saddened to have confirmed what he had only suspected until now. "I know that 3 of the Fel children survived, but what of Chak? Only 2 survived," Formby said. "Jagged and Wynn. Chak, Davin, and Cherith are all dead." "I'm sorry to hear that," Luke said. "I like Chak very much." "But what of Chem?" Mara asked, picking the question off the top of Luke's head. "Was she killed too?" "Chem?" A sly smile came to Formby's mouth. "Chem is a son's name." "Excuse me," Mara said. "We never actually met." "I should think not." The smile grew wider and shiftier. Chem would be the Fel's shadow child. "Shadow child?" Luke asked. "Publicly unacknowledged," Formby explained. "Secret, in fact. It's a common Chiss precaution to keep enemies from wiping out an entire ruling family." Luke began to have a guilty feeling in his stomach. "How secret?" "Quite," Formby replied. "In fact, this is the first time I've heard of a Chem Fel. I imagine you heard the name from Wynn." "Jason did," Mara replied. "How could you know?" "Wynn is notorious for spilling secrets," he said. "And now we've compounded it," Luke said. I hope you'll hold the name in confidence. Of course. Formby's voice was sincere. And you shouldn't feel bad. Soontir Fel is a clever one. I often suspect that Wynn reveals only what he wishes her to. So there we have it, the final solution that makes sense of all these disparate Fel kids. There are 5 official ones and 1 unofficial one. Chak, Davin, and Cherith are dead, Jagged and Wynn are alive, and Chem is their shadow child. I guess definitely the spare to be kept in reserves if all the other Fels are killed. Additionally, Chem is revealed to be a boy, not a girl, as many people suspected. But we don't have an answer for how Chak and Davin are so old, and that came through reference material like the Star Wars fact files. The fact files on Syal and Baron Fel have a lot of errors in them. But one thing they did add was the idea that Chak and Davin, their existence was kept secret so that no one knows about them during the events of the X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic and afterwards. That somehow this famous actress had 2 whole kids and no one noticed and no one knew. And Wedge didn't even know, because he definitely would have thought about his nephews in the Race Squadron books if he had known about them. So it's a solution, it works. But I do miss the good old days when everyone thought that a different Fel child was a clone of the Baron, and Chem was maybe a girl, and Chak and Davin were the same person with 2 different names. Just a wild time to be speculating on the Star Wars online forums. And of course, the Fel family gets only more convoluted from there, because in the Legacy comics, set definitely long after the new Jedi Order series, we have an Imperial Emperor again. He's Force sensitive, and his last name is Fel.